What would you do if the person you helped on the roadside turned out to be a king? Would you still have shown kindness if you knew they held your fate in their hands? And here's the real question. What would you do if your own family sold you like cattle, only for that very act to change your destiny forever? Before we dive into this epic tale of betrayal, humiliation, and a love that defied every rule. Lovelies, don't forget to subscribe and follow for more tales like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from so we can give you a shout out in our next video. And here's something fun. If you were inside this story, who would you be? Would you be Selene, the girl who rose from chains to a crown? King Alaric, the alpha who learned that true strength lies in mercy? Or maybe Ronan, the stepbrother whose greed led to his own downfall? Drop your answer below. Now, settle in. This is the story of a slave who became a queen, and an alpha who discovered that even kings can kneel before love. Prologue. The Price of Blood. The rain came down in sheets that night, hammering against the roof of the small cottage like 1,000 angry fists. Inside, the fire had long since died, leaving only embers that cast weak, trembling shadows across the walls. Selene knelt beside her father's bed, her small hands clutching his rough, work-worn fingers. She was only 12, but she already knew what death looked like. It had a smell, metallic and sweet, like copper left out in the sun. It had a sound, the wet, rattling breath that seemed to shake her father's entire frame. "Papa," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't go." His eyes, once bright and full of laughter, struggled to focus on her face. When they finally did, a faint smile touched his lips. It was the saddest smile she'd ever seen. "My little moon," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. "You were named for the light, because even in the darkest night, the moon still shines." "I don't want to shine without you," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "Kindness, Selene. Promise me, no matter what comes, no matter how dark it gets, promise me you'll stay kind. Kindness will be your crown, even when the world throws mud at you." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Good girl," he breathed. And then, with one final exhale that seemed to carry his very soul away, he was gone. The rain continued to fall, the embers continued to die, and Selene continued to kneel there, holding the hand of a man who would never hold hers again. That night, something inside her broke, but something else, something quiet and unshakable, took root. A promise, a vow. "I will be kind, Papa, no matter what." Chapter 1. The Serpent's Nest. 3 years passed like a slow poison. Selene's mother, hollowed out by grief and fear, married a man named Gareth, a merchant with a house in the better part of town and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He brought with him a son, Ronan, who was 19 and looked at Selene the way a wolf looks at a wounded deer. At first, they pretended. Gareth called her daughter. Ronan called her sister. But pretenses, like masks, eventually slip. It started small. A chore left for her while the others ate. A torn dress that was accidentally ruined. Whispers behind closed doors that stopped the moment she entered a room. Then it grew teeth. "Fetch the water, girl," Ronan would bark, sprawled in his chair like a lord. "And don't spill it this time, or you'll sleep in the shed." Selene would obey, her head down, her hands steady. She had learned that silence was armor. Gareth was worse in his way. He never shouted. He simply looked at her as though she were an inconvenience, a stain on his pristine life. And when her mother tried to defend her, his hand would strike fast and sharp, leaving her mother crumpled and weeping. After the first time, Selene's mother stopped defending her. Now, at 15, Selene had grown into a young woman whose beauty was undeniable. Her hair fell in dark waves, her eyes held the grey-blue of storm clouds, and her skin, despite the harsh soap and long hours, glowed with a light that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than flesh. It was a beauty that made Ronan hate her even more. "You think you're special, don't you?" he hissed one evening, cornering her in the kitchen. His breath reeked of ale. "You think that pretty face makes you better than us?" "No," she said quietly, eyes on the floor. "I don't." "Good." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something dark and oily. "Because you're nothing. You hear me? Nothing but a burden we're stuck with." She didn't respond. She had learned that words only fed his anger. But that night, as she lay on the thin pallet in the attic, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, she whispered into the darkness, "I'm not nothing, Papa. I'm still your little moon." And somewhere, in the space between sleep and waking, she thought she felt a hand brush her hair, gentle, warm, and gone. Chapter 2. The Sale. It was Gareth who first suggested it. They were gathered around the dining table, Gareth, Ronan, and Selene's mother, who sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. "We're drowning in debt," Gareth said, his voice clipped and businesslike. "The shipment from the southern ports never came. We're finished, unless we find a way to pay what's owed." Ronan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So, sell something." "We've sold everything worth selling," Gareth snapped. Then his gaze slid sideways, toward the corner of the room where Selene stood, scrubbing the floor. Ronan's eyes followed. A slow, wicked smile spread across his face. "Not everything." Selene's mother looked up, her face pale. "No." "She's a woman now," Ronan said, as though discussing livestock. "And a pretty one. There are men who'd pay handsomely for that." "No," her mother repeated, her voice trembling. "She's my daughter." "I won't." Gareth slammed his fist on the table, and the sound cracked through the room like a whip. "You'll do what I tell you to do, woman." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Selene's hands had stopped moving. She stared at the soapy water, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "There's a nobleman," Gareth continued, quieter now, more dangerous. "Lord Veyron. He's known for his entertainments. He pays well for girls like her." Selene's stomach turned. She had heard the stories. Lord Veyron's estate was a place where women went in and never came out the same. Some didn't come out at all. "It's decided," Gareth said, standing. "We leave at dawn." Selene's mother opened her mouth, but no sound came. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and for a moment, Selene thought she saw regret, shame, maybe even love. But then her mother's gaze dropped, and she said nothing. That night, Selene did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the stars, and whispered the only prayer she had left. "Papa, if you're listening, help me be kind, even now, especially now." Chapter 3. The Chains. Dawn came cold and grey. Selene was dragged from her bed before the sun had fully risen, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. Ronan yanked her down the stairs, grinning like a man who'd just won a wager. "Don't look so miserable," he sneered. "You should be grateful. At least you'll be worth something." Gareth was already outside, loading the cart. Selene's mother stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her face a mask of hollow resignation. "Mama!" Selene called out, her voice breaking. Please. Her mother's lips trembled, but she turned away, stepping back into the house. The door closed with a soft, final thud. Selene felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, but the last fragile thread of hope she'd been clinging to. Ronan shoved her into the cart. Move. They travelled for hours through winding forest roads. The trees loomed overhead like silent witnesses, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Selene's mother followed behind on a second horse, her head bowed, her silence louder than any scream. The ropes burned. The cart jolted over every rock and rut. And Selene, for the first time since her father's death, allowed herself to cry. Not loud, wrenching sobs, just quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks and disappeared into the fabric of her worn dress. She thought of her father's words. Kindness will be your crown. But how could kindness matter in a world this cruel? Chapter 4. The Stranger on the Road. They were halfway to the castle when they saw him. A man stood beside a broken carriage, his tall frame cloaked in black, his face shadowed by the hood. One of the wheels had shattered, leaving the elegant vehicle tilted awkwardly to the side. Gareth pulled the cart to a stop, eyeing the stranger warily. What happened here? The man looked up, and though his face was mostly hidden, his voice was smooth and calm, like deep water under moonlight. An unfortunate accident. The wheel gave out. I don't suppose you could spare a moment to help a traveller? Ronan barked out a laugh. Do we look like servants? Fix it yourself, Gareth added with a sneer. We've got business to attend to. The man said nothing. He simply looked at them, his gaze unreadable. And then Selene, still bound and sitting in the back of the cart, did something that made no sense. She climbed down. Girl, what are you? Gareth started, but she ignored him. She knelt beside the broken wheel, her tied hands awkward but determined. The wood was heavy, splintered, and rough against her already raw palms. She didn't care. She lifted, braced, and helped guide the wheel back into place as best she could. The stranger knelt beside her, working in silence. Together, they managed to stabilize the carriage enough for temporary travel. When it was done, Selene's fingers were bleeding, her dress smudged with dirt and grease. But she smiled, just faintly, as she stood. The man studied her, his gaze piercing even in the shadow of his hood. What is your name? Selene, she said softly. Selene. He repeated it like a word in a forgotten language. A name like moonlight. He paused, then added, his voice almost gentle. Remember, Selene, no good deed is unseen. She nodded, unsure what he meant, and climbed back into the cart. Ronan yanked the reins. Enough wasting time. Let's go. As they pulled away, Selene glanced back once. The stranger stood there, watching. And though she couldn't see his face clearly, she felt the weight of his gaze, like a hand resting on her shoulder. A strange, impossible thought whispered through her mind. I'll see him again. Chapter 5. The Revelation. The castle rose before them like a monument to power. Its walls were obsidian black, veined with silver, and its towers pierced the sky like claws. Banners fluttered in the wind, each emblazoned with the sigil of a wolf, fierce, proud, and unstoppable. Selene's breath caught. She had heard stories of this place, the seat of the Alpha, the throne of King Alaric, ruler of the 7 clans, the most feared and revered man in all the kingdoms. And they were selling her to him. No, not to him, to Lord Veyron, who served under him. That's what Gareth had said. But as they approached the gates, something felt wrong. The guards stood at attention, their armor polished to a mirror shine. And at the center of the courtyard, standing as still as stone, was the stranger from the road. He had thrown back his hood. His face was sharp and regal, his jawline carved from stone, his eyes a piercing amber that seemed to glow in the fading light. Dark hair fell just past his shoulders, and his presence, God's, his presence, was like standing too close to a fire. Gareth and Ronan froze. The guards dropped to one knee. "Alpha," they said in unison, their voices reverberating through the courtyard. Selene's world tilted. Alpha. Alpha. The man from the road, the one she had helped, the one who had spoken to her with such strange gentleness, was King Alaric himself. Gareth and Ronan fell to their knees so fast it was almost comical. Her mother stumbled off her horse, bowing low, her face drained of all colour. Alaric's gaze swept over them, cold and unreadable. Then it landed on Selene. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "You wished to sell her?" His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a blade. Ronan, trembling, nodded eagerly. Yes, my lord. A simple servant, worth a handful of gold, nothing more." "A handful of gold," Alaric repeated slowly. His eyes never left Selene's. "Is that what you believe she's worth?" "Yes, your majesty," Gareth stammered. "We thought, perhaps, for your entertainments, or—" "I'll take her." The words fell like stones into a still pond. Gareth blinked. "You— what?" "Name your price." Ronan's eyes lit up with greed. 50 gold pieces, my lord." Alaric reached into his cloak and pulled out a heavy pouch. He tossed it at Ronan's feet. It landed with a dull thud, splitting open to reveal a small fortune, easily 3 times what they'd asked. "Now leave," Alaric said, his voice dropping to something darker. "Before my mercy runs out." They scrambled to their feet, snatching up the gold, bowing and scraping as they backed toward the gates. Selene's mother cast one last glance at her daughter, a look that might have been guilt or fear or nothing at all. And then they were gone. Selene stood alone in the courtyard, the chains still on her wrists, her heart pounding in her chest. Alaric stepped forward. He reached out, and with one smooth motion, he broke the ropes binding her hands. "You're free," he said quietly. She stared at him, confused, breathless. "Why?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Because you helped a stranger on the road." And with that, he turned and walked toward the castle, leaving her standing there, unchained, uncertain, and utterly, impossibly free. Chapter 6. The Palace of Wolves. The palace was a labyrinth. Corridors stretched endlessly, lined with tapestries that depicted battles, coronations, and wolves running beneath a blood-red moon. Servants moved like shadows, their eyes downcast, their footsteps silent. Selene was given a small room in the servants' wing. Nothing grand, but compared to the attic she'd left behind, it felt like a palace in itself. The bed had a real mattress. The window overlooked a garden. She touched the blanket, half expecting it to disappear. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and a stern expression stood in the doorway. "I'm Marta," she said briskly, "head of the household staff. You'll work in the kitchens, the gardens, and wherever else you're needed. You'll earn your keep here. Understood?" Selene nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Marta's expression softened, just barely. "You're lucky, girl. The Alpha doesn't usually involve himself in transactions like yours. Whatever you did, it made an impression." "I only helped him," Selene said quietly. Marta snorted. "Helped him?" "The Alpha of the 7 clans." She shook her head, muttering something under her breath. Well, don't let it go to your head. There are plenty here who'll remind you where you came from. She wasn't wrong. Over the following days, Selene quickly learned that while the Alpha had freed her from chains, the palace had its own kind of bondage. The other servants whispered when she passed. The Alpha's new pet, the girl from the mud. Does she think she's special? Lady Alara, one of the noblewomen in the court, sneered openly. I hear she was bought like cattle. How quaint. Selene kept her head down and did her work. She scrubbed floors, tended the gardens, and helped in the kitchens. She didn't complain. She didn't argue. But at night, alone in her room, she allowed herself to wonder. Why had he saved her? What did he see when he looked at her? And why, despite everything, did her heart skip a beat whenever she caught a glimpse of him in the halls? Chapter 7. The Wolf and the Moon. It was a week before she saw him again. Selene was in the gardens, kneeling beside a bed of silver roses, rare flowers that only bloomed under the full moon. She was humming softly, an old lullaby her father used to sing, when she heard a low, rumbling growl. She froze. A massive wolf stood at the edge of the garden, its fur black as midnight, its eyes glowing amber. Blood matted its side, a deep gash that looked fresh. Selene's breath caught. She knew she should run. Wolves were dangerous, even the ones that served the Alpha, but the creature was hurt. Slowly, carefully, she rose to her feet. It's all right, she murmured, her voice soft and steady. I won't hurt you. The wolf's ears flattened, and it bared its teeth. Selene knelt again, making herself small, non-threatening. She tore a strip of fabric from her apron and held it out. Let me help. Please. For a long, tense moment, the wolf didn't move. Then, with a low whine, it limped forward. Selene worked quickly, cleaning the wound with water from the garden fountain and wrapping it as best she could. The wolf stood still, its breathing heavy but calm. There, she whispered, tying off the bandage. You'll be all right. The wolf looked at her, really looked at her, and then, to her shock, it lowered its great head and nuzzled her hand. You're welcome, she said with a soft laugh. Even beasts need gentleness. Selene's heart stopped. She turned. King Alaric stood at the edge of the garden, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He was dressed simply, a black tunic and trousers, no crown, no cloak. He looked almost human. Your Majesty, she stammered, scrambling to her feet. You weren't supposed to see that, he said, nodding toward the wolf. He's usually better at hiding when he's hurt. I didn't mean to intrude. You didn't. He stepped closer, his gaze dropping to the bandaged wolf. You helped him. Again. It's nothing, she said quickly. It's not nothing. His eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time she saw something there, something warm and human beneath the cold exterior. You see a wounded creature, and your first instinct is to heal it. Most people would have run. I'm not most people, she said before she could stop herself. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, you're not. They stood there in the moonlight, the wolf between them, and Selene felt something shift. A pull, magnetic and undeniable. Why did you buy me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alaric was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because the world has enough cruelty. And you reminded me that kindness still exists. Her breath hitched. He turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the garden. Sleep well, Selene. And thank you for helping him. He disappeared into the shadows, the wolf following at his heels. Selene stood there, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. And for the first time in years, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. Chapter 8. The Spider's Web Lady. Myron was beautiful in the way a viper is beautiful. Sleek, elegant, and deadly. She had been betrothed to King Alaric since childhood, a political arrangement between two powerful families. She wore her future title like armor, and she made sure everyone in the palace knew it, especially Selene. "You there?" Myron called one afternoon, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The girl who was bought. Selene, carrying a basket of linens, stopped and bowed. "Yes, my lady." Myron glided forward, her gown shimmering like liquid silver. She circled Selene slowly, studying her the way one might study an insect. "I've heard such interesting stories about you. The Alpha's little charity case." Selene said nothing. "Tell me," Myron continued, her smile sharpening. "Do you think he sees you as anything more than a momentary amusement? A pet to be kind to when he's bored?" "I don't presume to know His Majesty's thoughts," Selene said quietly. "Good." Myron leaned in close, her breath cold against Selene's ear. "Because if you did, if you dared to think you could ever be more than what you are, a slave, a nobody, I would make sure you regretted it." She pulled back, her smile radiant once more. "Enjoy your linens, darling." And with that, she swept away, leaving Selene standing there, her hands shaking. But it wasn't fear that made her tremble. It was rage. Chapter 9. The Banquet of Thorns. The announcement came without warning. "A grand banquet," Marta said, her tone clipped, "to celebrate the Alpha's generosity and the strength of the realm. All servants will attend, to serve, of course." Selene's stomach twisted. She had a bad feeling about this. The night of the banquet arrived with all the grandeur and spectacle the palace could muster. The great hall was transformed. Candles flickered like stars, silk draped from the ceiling, and tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, honeyed fruits, and goblets of wine. Nobles filled the room, dressed in silks and jewels, their laughter loud and careless. Selene and the other servants moved through the crowd, pouring wine, clearing plates, invisible. Or so she thought. "Ah, there she is." Lady Mirren's voice rang out, sweet as poisoned honey. "The girl who inspired our dear Alpha's kindness." The room fell silent. Selene looked up, her heart sinking. Mirren stood at the head of the hall, resplendent in a gown of deep crimson. She smiled, gesturing for Selene to approach. "Come, come. Don't be shy. We simply must toast to you." Selene had no choice. She walked forward, her head high despite the whispers, the stares, the barely concealed sneers. Mirren handed her a goblet of wine. "Here, darling. Serve our guests. Show them the grace that so moved our king." It was a trap. Selene felt it in her bones. But she took the goblet and moved through the crowd, pouring wine for noble after noble, each one looking at her as though she were something to be pitied or mocked. And then, as she reached Lord Veyron, the very man her family had tried to sell her to, he accidentally jostled her arm. The wine spilled. It splashed across her dress, staining the grey fabric dark red. The room erupted in laughter. "Oh dear," Mirren cooed, her eyes glittering with malice. "How clumsy. But then, what can we expect from a girl bought for a handful of gold?" Selene stood there, wine dripping from her dress, her face burning with humiliation. She wanted to run, to disappear, to never be seen again. But then, enough. The word cut through the laughter like a blade. King Alaric stood at the entrance to the hall, his presence commanding instant silence. His eyes were cold, his jaw set. He walked forward, each step deliberate, until he stood before Selene. The hall held its breath. Alaric reached up and removed the crown from his head, the silver circlet that marked him as Alpha, as king, as ruler of all, and he placed it on Selene's head. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Let the court remember," Alaric said, his voice ringing through the hall. "This is the hand that lifted mine when I was fallen. This is the heart that showed mercy when the world showed none, and she will be honoured in this hall, not mocked." He turned to Lady Mirren, his gaze sharp enough to draw blood. "You will apologise." Myron's face went pale. "Your Majesty, Now." She swallowed hard. I apologise." Alaric said nothing more. He simply took Selene's hand and led her from the hall, the crown still resting on her head, the weight of it both terrifying and exhilarating. Behind them, the nobles stood in stunned silence, and Lady Myron's smile had turned to something far more dangerous. Chapter 10. The Rising Storm. News travelled fast in the palace. By morning, every servant, every guard, every noble knew what had happened at the banquet, and opinions were divided. Some whispered that the Alpha had lost his mind. Others said he was making a statement. A few, very few, said it was about time someone challenged the cruelty of the court. But Selene heard none of it. She stayed in her room, the crown returned to the king's chambers, her heart still racing from the night before. He had defended her, protected her, crowned her in front of everyone. Why? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Marta. "The Alpha requests your presence in the gardens." Selene's pulse quickened. Now. Now. She followed Marta through the winding halls, her mind a storm of questions, until they reached the silver rose garden where she had first tended the wolf. Alaric stood there, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. "You asked for me, Your Majesty?" Selene said softly. He turned, and his expression was unreadable. "Do you know why I did what I did last night?" She shook her head. "Because I'm tired," he said, his voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "Tired of a world where kindness is weakness. Tired of watching good people be ground into dust while the cruel thrive." He stepped closer. "You could have ignored me on that road. You were in chains, being sold like an animal, and you still stopped to help a stranger." "It was the right thing to do," she said simply. "Exactly." He smiled, truly smiled, and it transformed his face. "That's why I want you to stay. Not as a servant, not as a curiosity, but as someone I can trust." Her breath caught. "I don't understand." "I think you do." His gaze held hers, intense and unwavering. "I think you understand more than anyone else in this cursed place." Before she could respond, a sharp voice interrupted. How touching. They both turned. Lady Mirren stood at the edge of the garden, her smile cold. The Alpha and his little pet. How very quaint. "Leave," Alaric said, his voice a low growl. "Oh, I will," Mirren said lightly, "but not before I deliver a message." "Your stepbrother is here, Selene. He's demanding more gold. Apparently he feels you were undersold." Selene's blood ran cold. "Ronan is here?" "In the courtyard, making quite the scene." Myron's smile widened. "Such a charming family you have." Alaric's jaw clenched. "I'll handle this." But Selene grabbed his arm. "No, let me." He looked at her, surprised. "Selene?" "Please," she said. "Let me face him." After a long moment, he nodded. Together they walked to the courtyard. And there, standing in the centre like a rat in a trap, was Ronan. Chapter 11. The serpent returns. Ronan had changed in the weeks since he'd sold her. His clothes were finer, his coin purse heavier, but his eyes, those cold, greedy eyes, were the same. Well, well, he sneered when he saw her. If it isn't my dear stepsister. Living the good life, I see. What do you want, Ronan? Selene asked, her voice steady. What I'm owed, he said, stepping forward. You think 50 gold is enough for a girl like you? You're worth far more now that the Alpha's taken a liking to you. So here's the deal. Triple what we were paid, and I'll disappear. Alaric stepped forward, his presence like a thundercloud. You were paid more than she was worth to you. You'll get nothing more. Ronan's eyes flicked to the king, and for a moment, fear flickered across his face. But greed won out. You don't understand, Your Majesty. She's my family. I have a right. You have no rights here, Alaric said coldly. Leave. Now. Ronan's face twisted with rage. You think you're untouchable, don't you? Both of you. But power shifts, crowns fall, and when yours does, I'll be there to watch. He turned and stormed toward the gates, but not before casting one last venomous glance at Selene. You'll regret this, he hissed. Both of you. And then he was gone. Selene felt Alaric's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Are you all right? He asked. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. I'm fine. But she wasn't, because she knew, deep in her bones, that Ronan wasn't done, and neither was Lady Mirren. Chapter 12. The plot. Ronan didn't leave the kingdom. He lingered in the shadows, nursing his wounded pride and plotting his revenge. And it wasn't long before he found an ally. Lady Myron was easy to find. She held court in a private salon, surrounded by sycophants and hangers-on, her smile as cold as winter frost. Ronan bowed low, his voice dripping with false humility. My lady, I come seeking justice. Myron raised an eyebrow. Justice. How dramatic. The Alpha has taken what's mine, Ronan said, his voice hardening. My stepsister. She was sold to fund our family, and now she's being paraded around like a queen. It's an insult. I couldn't agree more, Mirren said, her smile sharpening. But what do you propose we do about it? Ronan leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. I propose we remind them both of their place. The Alpha thinks he's untouchable. The girl thinks she's special. We show them they're wrong. Myron's eyes gleamed. Go on. Poison, Ronan said simply. A slow-acting one. We frame the girl, make it look like she's trying to kill him. The court will turn on her. And you'll be there to comfort the Alpha, to remind him of his duty to marry someone worthy. Mirren considered this, her fingers drumming on the armrest of her chair. And if it fails? She asked. It won't, Ronan said, because I know the girl. She's soft. She'll confess to anything if she thinks it'll save someone she loves. Myron smiled, a slow, predatory smile. Very well, let's begin. Chapter 13. The Poison. 3 days later, the plan was set in motion. It was a night like any other. The Alpha held a private dinner with his council, 5 men who advised him on matters of state, trade, and war. Selene, as was becoming her quiet custom, helped serve the meal. She moved through the room with practiced grace, pouring wine, setting down plates, her presence so unobtrusive that the men barely noticed her. But Ronan noticed. He had bribed his way into the kitchens, posing as a supplier. And in the brief moment when the head cook turned his back, Ronan slipped a vial of clear liquid into the Alpha's wine. Colourless, tasteless, deadly, but only if consumed over time. A single sip would do nothing, but 3, 4, 5. The cumulative effect would bring the alpha to his knees, weak, feverish, and unable to rule. And when the investigation began, all eyes would turn to the girl who served him. Selene had no idea. She poured the wine, her hands steady, her mind elsewhere. She was thinking about the garden, about the wolf, about the way Alaric had looked at her when he placed the crown on her head. She didn't see the shadow of betrayal lurking in the cup. Alaric lifted the goblet to his lips and drank. Chapter 14. The sickness. It started subtly, a slight tremor in the alpha's hand during the council meeting the next day, a bead of sweat on his brow despite the cool air, a moment of dizziness that he brushed off as fatigue. By the third day, he could no longer hide it. He staggered during a walk through the courtyard, catching himself against a stone pillar. His skin had taken on a greyish pallor, and his breathing was laboured. Marta found him and immediately summoned the royal physician. "Poison," the old man declared after a thorough examination. "Slow acting, but unmistakable. Someone has been dosing His Majesty." The word spread through the palace like wildfire. Poison, assassination, treason. An investigation was launched immediately. The guards questioned everyone: cooks, servants, council members. And when they traced the wine back to the kitchens, they found something damning. A vial, empty, hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the pantry where Selene often worked. And on that vial, traced in dust, was a single fingerprint that matched hers. It was a setup, of course. Ronan had planted it carefully, wearing gloves, placing it exactly where it would be found. The guards came for Selene at dawn. Chapter 15. The accusation. She was dragged from her room in chains. Real chains this time, not rope, iron that clinked with every step. "What's happening?" she cried, struggling against the guard's grip. "I didn't do anything." They said nothing. They simply led her through the corridors, past servants who whispered and pointed, past nobles who looked on with satisfaction. She was thrown into the throne room, forced to her knees before the High Council. And there, seated on the throne, too weak to stand, but too stubborn to stay in bed, was Alaric. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed, but when he saw her in chains, something flashed across his expression. Pain, disbelief. "Selene," he said, his voice hoarse. "Tell me this isn't true." "It's not," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Your Majesty, I could never hurt you." "Evidence was found," one of the councilmen said coldly. "A vial of poison, hidden in the kitchens where you work. Your fingerprints were on it." "That's impossible," Selene protested. "I've never seen that vial." "Someone is framing me." "Or," Lady Mirren said, stepping forward with a look of feigned sorrow, "you were discovered before you could finish what you started. Perhaps you grew tired of being a servant. Perhaps you wanted more." "No!" Selene's voice broke. "I swear on my father's grave, I didn't do this." Alaric stared at her, and for a long, agonizing moment, she couldn't read his expression. Did he believe her? Or had she lost him too? "Lock her in the tower," he said finally, his voice flat, "until we know the truth." "No!" Selene screamed as the guards hauled her to her feet. "Please! Alaric, please!" But he had already turned away. Chapter 16. The Tower. The tower was cold. A single room at the top of the highest spire, with one narrow window that looked out over the forest. A bed, a chamber pot, and nothing else. Selene sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her knees drawn to her chest. She had cried until there were no tears left. Now she simply sat, numb and hollow. How did it come to this? She had helped a stranger, been kind, done nothing but try to survive. And now she was here, accused of trying to murder the one person who had ever shown her mercy. The irony was so bitter it choked her. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Who's there?" she called, her voice hoarse. The door creaked open, and Marta stepped inside, carrying a tray of bread and water. "I'm not supposed to be here," the older woman said quietly, setting the tray down. "But I couldn't let you starve." "Why?" Selene asked. "Everyone else thinks I'm guilty." Marta studied her for a long moment. "Because I've been in this palace for 30 years, girl. And I know a liar when I see one." She paused. "And I know a setup when I see one too." Hope flickered in Selene's chest. "You believe me?" "I do," Marta said. "But belief isn't proof. And unless we find proof, you're going to hang." Selene's stomach dropped. "Hang?" "The penalty for attempting to assassinate the Alpha is death," Marta said grimly. "The trial is in 3 days." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "For what it's worth, the Alpha hasn't been the same since they took you. He's barely eating, barely sleeping. Whatever you did to him, girl, it worked." And then she was gone, leaving Selene alone once more. But this time, Selene wasn't hollow. This time she was angry. Someone had framed her. Someone had poisoned Alaric. And she was going to find out who, even if it meant tearing the palace apart, stone by stone. Chapter 17. The Confession. The answer came from an unexpected source. That night, as the moon rose full and bright, Selene heard scratching at her window. She looked up, and her breath caught. The wolf. The black wolf she had bandaged in the garden. It stood on the narrow ledge outside her window, its amber eyes glowing in the darkness. "How did you—" she began, but the wolf simply stared at her. And then, before her eyes, it began to change. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded, limbs lengthened, and where the wolf had stood, now stood a man, tall, bare-chested, his dark hair falling past his shoulders. Alaric. Selene's mind reeled. You're a shifter," he said, his voice rough. "The Alpha of the 7 clans isn't just a title, Selene. It's what I am." He climbed through the window, his movements graceful despite his weakened state. Up close, she could see the toll the poison had taken, his skin pale, his breathing laboured. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "You're too weak. I had to see you." He sank onto the bed, his hand pressed against his side. "I had to know." "Know what?" "If I was wrong." His eyes met hers, and they were filled with anguish. "If I had betrayed the one person who showed me kindness." Selene's heart clenched. "You think I did it?" "I don't know what to think," he admitted. "The evidence was planted," she said fiercely. "Someone is trying to destroy me. Destroy us." "Who?" "I don't know," she said. "But I'll find out. I swear it." Alaric was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. "I want to believe you." "Then believe me," she whispered. "You said you saw something in me on that road. That you saw kindness. Was that a lie?" "No." "Then trust it," she said. "Trust me." He stared at her, his amber eyes searching hers. And then, slowly, he nodded. "I do." Relief flooded through her, so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. "But we need proof," Alaric said, "and we're running out of time." "Then we find it," Selene said. Together. Chapter 18. The Hunt. They had 2 days. Alaric, still weak but determined, began his own investigation. He couldn't do it openly, not without revealing that he doubted the council's findings. So he moved in secret, questioning servants in the dead of night, searching the kitchens himself. Selene, trapped in the tower, could do nothing but wait. But on the second night, Marta returned. "I found something," she said, her voice urgent. She pulled out a crumpled piece of parchment. "One of the kitchen boys found it in the trash. It's a receipt for Nightsbane, the poison used on the Alpha." Selene's hands trembled as she read it. The receipt was dated 3 days before the poisoning, and at the bottom, in elegant script, was a signature. Lady Myron. "It's not enough," Marta said grimly. "She'll claim it was forged, or that she bought it for medicinal purposes. We need more." "Then we get more," Selene said, her jaw set. "Where is she now?" "In her chambers?" "But you can't just watch me." That night, under the cover of darkness, Selene did something reckless. She escaped. Using the bedsheets tied together as a rope, she lowered herself from the tower window. It was a long, terrifying descent, but she made it, landing hard on the ground below. She moved through the palace like a ghost, keeping to the shadows, avoiding guards. And when she reached Lady Mirren's chambers, she pressed her ear to the door. Voices. 2 of them. "Can't fail now," Ronan was saying. "The trial is tomorrow. Once she's convicted, we can move forward with the next phase." "And the Alpha?" Myron's voice was cold, calculating. "We'll be weak enough to control. Or kill, if necessary." Selene's blood ran cold. She had heard enough. But as she turned to leave, her foot caught on a loose stone. The sound echoed through the corridor. The voices inside went silent. "Someone's there," Ronan hissed. The door flew open, and Selene found herself face to face with her stepbrother. His eyes widened in shock. Then fury. "You!" he snarled. "How did you—" Selene didn't wait. She ran. Behind her, Ronan's shouts echoed through the halls. "Guards! The prisoner has escaped." She ran faster, her heart pounding, her lungs burning. She had the proof. She had the confession. But she had to reach Alaric before they caught her. Chapter 19. The trial. She didn't make it. The guards caught her in the courtyard, dragging her back in chains. But this time, she didn't fight, because she had won. Alaric had heard the commotion, and when he emerged from his chambers, still weak but standing tall, he saw her, and he saw the truth in her eyes. "Bring her to the throne room," he commanded, "and bring Lady Mirren and Ronan as well." The trial began at dawn. The throne room was packed. Nobles, servants, guards, all gathered to witness the judgment. Selene stood in the centre, her hands bound, her head high. Ronan and Lady Mirren stood to the side, their expressions carefully neutral. "Selene of House," the herald began, but Alaric cut him off. "No," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "This trial is not for her. It's for them." He pointed at Ronan and Myron. Shock rippled through the crowd. "Your Majesty," Myron said smoothly, "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Alaric descended from the throne, his amber eyes blazing. "Last night, Selene overheard a conversation between you and her stepbrother, a conversation in which you both admitted to poisoning me and framing her." Myron's face went pale. "That's absurd. She's lying." "Am I?" Selene stepped forward. "Then explain this." She pulled out the receipt, now held by Marta, who stepped forward as witness. "A receipt for Nightsbane, purchased by you 3 days before the Alpha fell ill." "That proves nothing," Myron said, but her voice wavered. "Perhaps not," Alaric said. "But this does." He nodded to the guards, who stepped forward with Ronan in tow. The man was bruised, his face bloody. "He confessed," Alaric said coldly. "Under interrogation. He told us everything." Ronan's face crumpled. She made me do it. She promised me gold. Power. Silence! Mirren shrieked, her composure finally shattering. You worthless fool! And in that moment, her guilt was laid bare. The hall erupted in whispers. Alaric raised his hand, and silence fell. Lady Mirren, Ronan of House Gareth, you are both guilty of attempted regicide and conspiracy. The sentence is death. Ronan fell to his knees, sobbing. Please, please, Your Majesty, I didn't mean... Myron said nothing. She simply stared at Selene with pure, undiluted hatred. And then Selene did something no one expected. She stepped forward. Your Majesty, wait. Alaric looked at her, surprised. Selene? Please, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Ronan is my brother. Whatever he's done, he's still my mother's son. And Myron, she acted out of fear of losing her place, her power. They tried to kill me, Alaric said flatly, and frame you. I know, Selene whispered, but if we kill them, we become what they are. Let mercy be the crown we wear together. The hall was silent. Alaric stared at her for a long, tense moment. Then, slowly, he lowered his sword. So be it. His voice rang through the hall. Ronan, you are banished from this kingdom. You will leave tonight and never return. If you are seen within our borders again, the sentence of death will be carried out. Ronan sobbed with relief. And Lady Mirren, you are stripped of your title, your lands, and your position. You too are banished. Myron's face twisted with rage, but she said nothing. Take them away, Alaric commanded. As the guards led them from the hall, Mirren cast one last look at Selene, a look that promised vengeance, even in defeat. But Selene didn't flinch. She had won. Chapter 20. The Claiming. The next morning, the palace awoke to a different world. The Alpha, recovered and strong once more, stood before his people in the great courtyard. And beside him, dressed in a gown of silver and moonlight, stood Selene. No chains, no ropes, no shadows, just light. From dust she came, Alaric declared, his voice carrying across the crowd. From light she rose, and she will reign beside me, not by bloodline, but by heart. He took her hand, lifting it high. Selene is my mate, my queen, and anyone who questions her place questions me. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some were genuine, some were cautious, but all bowed, because the Alpha had spoken. That night, as the moon rose full and bright, Alaric and Selene stood alone in the silver rose garden. Do you regret it? She asked softly, showing mercy. No, he said. You taught me something I'd forgotten. What's that? That even kings can be humbled by kindness. He turned to her, his amber eyes soft. And that even slaves can be crowned. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. And you taught me that even in the darkest night, light can still shine. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away her tears. You are my light, Selene. My moon, my everything. And then he kissed her, soft and deep and full of promise. Around them, the silver roses bloomed brighter than ever before, as if the garden itself was celebrating. And in the distance, a lone wolf howled at the moon. Epilogue. The Moon and the Wolf. Years passed. The kingdom prospered under the rule of King Alaric and Queen Selene. She became known as the Merciful Queen, beloved by the people for her kindness and wisdom. Ronan wandered the borderlands, haunted by his choices, but alive. Some said he found redemption in service to the poor. Others said he simply faded into obscurity. Lady Mirren vanished into exile, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in the courts of other kingdoms. And in the castle of silver banners, the people told the story of a girl who was sold for gold, yet became a queen, of a king who learned that true strength lies in mercy. They called it the slave and the Alpha's crown. And every full moon, if you listened carefully, you could hear the Alpha and his queen walking through the silver rose garden, their laughter mixing with the song of wolves. Two souls who had found each other in the darkness, two hearts that had learned to shine together. So, lovelies, that's the tale of Selene and Alaric, a story of betrayal and redemption, of cruelty and kindness, of a slave who became a queen and a king who learned to kneel. What would you have done in Selene's place? Would you have shown mercy to the ones who tried to destroy you? Or would you have let justice take its course? And Alaric, would you have trusted a stranger, or would you have let suspicion win? Don't forget to subscribe and follow for more tales like this. We've got so many more stories waiting for you. Stories of love, magic, revenge, and redemption. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, so we can give you a shout out in our next video. And remember, if you were inside this story, who would you be? Would you be Selene, rising from the ashes with grace and strength? King Alaric, the Alpha who learned that power means nothing without heart? Martyr, the loyal servant who stood up for what was right? Or maybe even the wolf, the silent guardian who saw everything? Drop your answers below. We love hearing from you. Until next time, lovelies, may your kindness be your crown, and may your light never dim. Sweet dreams and happy listening.